Urban legends about terrorism come in many forms. Sometimes words alone can instill mortal fear, especially when they're from an unseen source. But just because the threat is invisible doesn't mean that it's far away.
The story begins with a babysitter tucking in a young child for the night.
Okay, sweetheart, you have sweet dreams and you're...
She wishes him sweet dreams and leaves him to go to sleep. Downstairs in the living room, she busies herself with homework. Then the phone rings.
Hello, Jones residence.
But it isn't the parents calling to check up on their son. It's the creepy voice of some strange caller claiming he's upstairs with the boy. He says he's waiting for her to join them.
Why don't you just get lost? Don't...
Thinking it's just a prank call, she hangs up and goes back to her homework. But a short while later, the phone rings again.
Hello, Jones residence.
And it's the same eerie voice saying he's upstairs and that he's waiting for her to come up. Again, the sitter hangs up on him. But now she's a bit shaken and decides to call the police.
911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, I'm here babysitting alone and...
She tells them about the offending phone calls, and they say they'll send a car over just to make sure things are okay. They'll also put a tracer on the line to find out who's making the calls.
What's your name?
Reassured, the sitter goes back to her reading. But the phone rings again.
Hello, Jones residence.
And again, it's the sinister caller.
Just get lost. I told you not to call me ever.
This time she shouts at him to leave her alone, then slams down the phone and considers running. But she can't leave the child alone upstairs. Finally, the phone rings a fourth time.
What?
And this time it's the police.
Hello, ma'am? Yeah.
They tell her that the calls are coming from inside the house and that she should get out now. Then there's a knock at the door. She races to the door and lets in a police officer. They head upstairs to the boy's bedroom. As they burst in, they catch an intruder trying to escape out the window.
Turn around!
The sitter rescues the boy who's been tied up and gagged. As the trespasser is hustled out the door, he gives her one last message.
Call you later, baby.
Deeply upset, the sitter and the boy feel lucky to be alive. It's a horror story that has been around for decades. But is it for real?
The plausibility factor is teenagers do work as babysitters, and oftentimes they're not very old themselves. They're often quite inexperienced. It's a scary job. You don't know that house. It's an unknown factor. You don't know too much about the children. You may not know too much about the family.
This particular urban myth is a compelling one, I think, because you have a situation that everybody would have almost an anxiety dream about. I'm in a strange place. I'm in a strange situation. You know, there's somebody inside the house. I've got to protect the child, but I've got to protect myself. This one particularly, I think it grabs the consciousness because it fits your standard nightmare scenario for a lone individual in a perilous situation.
The irony, of course, is that the device teenage girls love so much, the telephone, becomes a tool of terror. This story is so powerful and so well known that it's been the basis of several feature films. In the 1974 horror movie Black Christmas, a young woman, alone in a sorority house over Christmas break, receives chilling phone calls from a savage killer hiding in the attic. The movie employs a violent version of the legend in which the children are kidnapped and in which the caller is flat out insane. In lighter versions of the story, the caller turns out to be the kid himself on the extension line, sometimes using a tape recording of an adult voice. In darker versions, the sitter herself is brutally murdered. Strangely, in all these variations, there's an implicit blaming of the victims, the babysitter, or the child, or the missing parents.
It's one of those, finger-pointing kinds of stories. If you had only stayed home and taken care of your children, this wouldn't have happened.
Other similar legends feature the babysitter herself as the threat to the child.
What's sort of poignant about this particular legend is that the threat, which one assumes is coming from the outside, is actually inside. The phone is a communication to the outside. The surprise here is it's a connection between inside and inside.
But can someone call a phone from within the same house? And can the call be traced? The answer depends on the decade and the phone technology of the era.
We have the ability to capture the number and then turn it over to the authorities. If the customer is being threatened and the customer's life is in danger or physical well-being is at issue, the customer would go to the police department and get a police report number, and at that point then we would put a trap on the line, being able to see who called from what number.
Of course, that's assuming today's technology. But the urban legend goes back many decades.
I think in the 60s what we began to see were folks with discretionary income beginning to think about additional lines for teenagers so teenagers could have their own phones.
And this is when the legend became popular. Since then, new telephone technologies have made calling from anywhere to anywhere possible. But there are details in the legend that give away how authentic it really is. One has to do with what takes place once a report is made about a telephone threat.
We would work just as quickly as we could to get information to law enforcement. They, of course, need the proper court orders and subpoenas and things like that for us to work with them.
But in the legend, no time is provided to get a court order for the phone trace. Hence, the story cannot be true.
I've never ever come across this situation. So unless the sitter is being trailed or stalked by someone personally, unless the house is being staked out, or someone's tapping my phone lines to find where sitters are going, nobody's really going to know the time or date or place of our babysittings. The dangers directly to the sitter really don't exist.
There's also the fact that when the story originated, most homes had all their phones on one line, making it impossible for the upstairs to call the downstairs. It may have the ring of truth, but there's no connection between the legend and fact.